All right, we are back in the same code that we were using in video number 6. This will be number 7. So if you are just tuning into this one, you may want to watch videos 1 through 6 first, because this will make a lot more sense if you've seen my previous videos, unless you're just looking for a quick review or whatnot. I used the same exact code that we just had, but I went through and I cleaned it up just a little bit. I took off the attributes that we had practiced working on in the last video, except for the one for the image. I kept the source attribute. Like I said before, it's a funky tag. It does not have a closing tag. It just kind of dangles there with the start tag. I put the source back in because I noticed when I did take it out that my little purple box, my placeholder box, did disappear. And for this particular exercise, I wanted to make sure that I kept it in. So just so you know, that's why I left that in there. I kept my CSS styling over on the right hand side. Again, I did not use IDs or class selectors for this one. I just styled based on the tag. So anything a P is going to be a certain color and so on. So I cleaned it up a little bit so you could see more clearly what was happening, because we're going to talk about the difference between block and inline elements. All right, so let's start back at our worksheet. And we are back to our box model construction company, and we are focused still on the HTML team. We have not switched over to CSS quite yet, but remember, we are building the framework for CSS to work within. So basically, Mr. Architect is building the walls and the furniture that CSS is then going to go in and do things with. All right, so we have 2 new characters that we need to meet, or employees of the box model construction company. We have Betty Block that we have already met in previous videos. And I'm going to keep the same color coding that I established in the previous as well. So if this doesn't make sense to you, you may want to go back, because colors definitely help me. So we have Betty Block. And we have her new friend that we have not met quite yet. This is a brand new character. This is Ingrid, Inline. Okay, they are different types of elements. We've already met them in code, but I'm going to explain a little bit about what they do and how they help things move around the page, and it'll make a lot more sense probably once we go into code, but I wanted you to understand what the characters do first. Okay, first thing that we need to understand, and I honestly probably should have brought Mr. Viewport in. Let's bring him in. He's the boss. He makes a lot of rules and decisions prior to hiring his team, and you kind of have no choice. When you're part of his team, you have to follow and do what he says. One of the most important things is that he works in a grid fashion. So Mr. Viewport's color was green, if you remember correctly, so we're going to go back to green. I only did part of the grid on him, because I wanted you to be able to see a little bit when I write it, and didn't want it to get too busy. But I think of it a lot like, I'm not saying it is exactly this, because if you think of it completely like this, it may get you confused down the line. But I think of Mr. Viewport kind of like those old school XY coordinate planes that we created in high school. And in fact, some of the mapping things that you can do in HTML and CSS actually do follow this pattern, but I'm not 100% sure about what the future holds with coding, since I'm still so new, so I don't want to say that this works like this all the time. This is just something that I seem to have noticed. So I kind of think of it like this top left corner being 0, 0. Whether or not that's reality, I honestly couldn't tell you. I just don't know enough about this stuff yet. But I do think as the top left corner is kind of my start position. So I'm going to star that for now, just for our purposes, so you kind of know that that is where things are going to start by default. That doesn't mean that they have to start there. There's things that you could style in CSS, and then there's also some different actions that you could circumvent things so that they can be forced to start in different positions on the viewport. But if you don't boss any of the HTML tags or elements around, then that's where they're going to fall. So by default, Betty Block and Ingrid Inline are going to fall. in that start position. However, they don't fall exactly the same way, which is the core of this video. It's also important to note that you could also, I don't know exactly how to word this, but the left to right position is important. And the top to down position is important. That establishes movement within the viewport. So you can think of it like a grid if you would like. However, you can wrap your brain. I sometimes call it a grid. I don't know if I can confirm if it works like that or not, but it would make sense because if you're dealing with pixels most of the time, then I'm assuming that it probably does work like a grid. So if it helps you to know that different elements can make movements from left to right and top to bottom. Obviously, we could keep going and draw a lot more arrows, but I think you get the idea. Okay, so Betty Block is a block element. When she decides to go onto the page, she is going to always start, and we're going to erase this. Now that you kind of see, oops, no we're not. I keep forgetting to use a different layer. That would make my life a lot easier. Let's just put in another viewport so you can get the idea. Okay. So when Betty Block comes in to the viewport, she is going to go to our start position. And she is going to run. Okay, she's going to start at the top left corner, and she's going to run the whole length of the viewport. That's her default. So basically, Betty Block just squishes right on in there. She's pretty awesome like that. There are some default spaces within the screen. We're not going to confuse you guys with that today, but just know that there's some built-in browser spaces that might affect some of this as well. Okay, so that's the first Betty Block. Say she wants to have a friend join her. We're going to still make her green. Or no, we need to make her orange because that was our color that we were rolling with. So let's stick with our same color coding pattern. So I'm going to put Betty Block back in. Just because if we stick with a color association, or once we establish a color association, then I like to stick with it. It's better for the brain. Okay, so that is Betty Block. She is going to take up that whole first part and spread all the way left to right. And it looks like she goes top to bottom, approximately 1 unit. It's not much space. It's typically about the space of a standard text. Say she has another friend, a second Betty Block. We could call her Barbara Block if you would like, if you want to stick with the B names. Say Barbara Block decides to come in. She is going to fall right underneath Betty Block. And we talked about this a little bit in the last video, and we saw a little bit about how they were falling. So I do recommend watching that one first, because it might make more sense to you. Okay, obviously my drawing is not perfect, but oops. Hopefully you get the gist here. All right, this is my second block level element. Okay, and we're gonna color Barbara Block in, because Barbara Block also, as the second block element, is going to stretch left to right and fill the whole space. There is a tiny bit of space in between. You can't see a lot of it in this one. I'll make it a little bit more distinct in my next one, but just know that the default state does leave some bit of space here. Okay, and we'll see that again once we go into live code and CodePen, but there is some space between those two. All right, so that's what Betty Block does. It doesn't seem that important. Yeah, I didn't know this for a really long time, and I didn't understand why things were squashing and doing weird things and having odd behaviors and going all over the place, and I couldn't control the behavior of the elements, and it was driving me mad. But once I understood this concept, I had a little more control over what was happening in the viewport. Okay, so then we have Ingrid Inline. All right, so she also wants to join the viewport party, but Ingrid is going to look like, at first, might act like a little bit of a Betty Block type element. Maybe. Okay. All right, because she's going to fall right underneath, and you're like, all right, maybe this is a block. But if we add another block, or I'm sorry, another inline, you're going to see a little bit different behavior. Let's get a different color orange in here. Okay. I'm going to add another Ingrid inline, and maybe she's a little bit longer. Still a little bit of space. She's actually going to join the party right next to that other block. That's different behavior than the two Betty blocks. All right, so say we have Ingrid. This one's Ingrid right here. And maybe we have her buddy, Isabel. Okay, Isabel inline. And maybe we need another friend. Let's go this color. Maybe this element is going to be a little bit smaller. But she is also going to join in line or across that spot. Okay, I don't know, maybe we want to name this one Israel. I'm thinking of names right off the top of my hat here. Okay, now if I were to add a fourth inline member, inline family member, it could potentially even go wrap. Like, say we want to add another one. And we have defined the space as a little bit longer. And let's get rid of this so you can see what's happening a little better. It may go down to the next line and continue. It's possible. And we'll see why more here soon once we get into live code a little bit. But what the inline element does is it actually just takes the space rather than Betty Block, who takes up the space of the entire first two areas left to right, like Betty Block did. What Ingrid inline family or the inline family does is takes up whatever space the content requires. So that could change. If it's an image, it might only take up the width and the height that's defined by the image attributes. If it's a text, it's only going to take up the height of, like, say you have 40 pixel height. It then will only take up 40 pixels of space. Okay. I know that right now it's probably like, this is a little much for me, especially with a scribble drawing, but as we get into CodePen, hopefully it'll clear up a little bit. Okay. Now, we've established that Ingrid inline and Betty Block are, they're different. They're different kind of characters. And let's see if I can erase this S, but it's driving me bonkers and it won't erase. Oh well. Probably on the wrong layer again. Story of my life. Yep. I am. Okay, so Ingrid inline and Betty Block. I'm sure you probably wondered why I drew them so weird. Because they kind of got this like thing going on around them. I did this a long time ago as more of a mental map for myself when I was trying to understand the block model. Or I'm sorry, the box model method. Gosh, I've got blocks and models and bottles, and I'm mixing up all kinds of things right now. But that's okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, I'm sick of that ugly green. Okay, the box model. I've been alluding to us talking to it about it more, and we're going to get into it a little bit tonight. It's probably going to take a little more video time and attention, but at least hopefully we can get the concept down. Okay, I have, if you've noticed, I have two HTML tags inside each box. Okay, and I'm going to keep this color coding red. It doesn't matter if they're an inline element or a block element, they're still going to be built with tags. Okay, so we know just looking at this is Ingrid with the span inside, so I'm assuming then span must be an inline type of element. The same with Betty Block. Those are div tag elements, so that is a block type element. Okay, then I also have some content. And we know that the content color is green because that's the Mr. Viewport color. Okay, and we still have the content that we have been working with here. Those dotted lines, those are my content. Okay. And whatever we put inside of that is what is going to actually render or show up in the viewport for the user to interact with or enjoy. Okay, let's just say for this purpose, it happens to be text content. Okay, so these are still held within those particular blocks. All right, now we have this other spoosh on the outside. I mean, looking at this, it just looks like a hot mess, but there really is a reason for my hot mess. I obviously didn't intend on sharing this with the world, so maybe I could have cleaned them up a little bit, but they work, right? They're real. Okay, so outside of the content, we have this thing called padding, okay? And that is this area. Let's see if I can color. Ooh, that didn't work. I was hoping maybe we could get away with that, but for the purposes of my video. Okay, there's this thing called padding. All right, I know we've talked about this, but we haven't really talked about this. Like, just to say there's a box model and be like, yeah, this uses the box model. This by far was one of the biggest issues that I had. I didn't understand it conceptually, understood what I thought those words meant, but I didn't actually get what they were doing, and I got really confused. You can't just throw like a picture of a box model on someone and expect them to understand how that moves within HTML and CSS. Okay, so we have some padding. Okay, I'm only going to color in the padding on Betty Block for the sake of time, but I want you to recognize that there's also some padding over here on Ingrid Inline. Okay, the important thing to note that with the inline block elements, they have these things. They have padding, but that doesn't mean it's always going to work. Because of the way that inline elements are built, the left and the right sides will be able to more likely move than the top and the bottom. I don't want to get too into that quite yet, but just know that they have the padding element. It may or may not actually kick in when you need to use it because it's an inline element. Okay, so then we have something called the border. Newsflash, when I was first learning this concept, I thought of a border like a border, like you put a border around a calendar. I don't know. I was thinking of my understanding of the word border. Like if you need to draw a box line around a piece of text, or you want to add a colorful drawing outside of a bulletin board, that would be a border. It does work like that, yes, but it can expand and contract. And it starts with 0. Like, it's there, but you can't necessarily see it until you define what it is. So it does work, has a little bit different behavior than what I thought it actually meant. So I kind of call it the padding protector, okay? Even if you cannot see these things, they are there. And I can't tell you how much that confused me, because they could be set at 0. And by default, many of them are set at 0. I can't say definitively. I don't know enough about code. I'm not far enough in this myself to say 100% they're all going to show up, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But, and again, this may be a wrong conceptual framework here, but for my intents and purposes at the beginning of code, it seemed to help me understand what was going on a little bit. Okay, so the border is there. Right now it's at its minimum, as is the padding. So let's assume that they're at 0 or very, very little, if you want to consider it like that. Okay, and again, Ingrid Inline over here has some border as well. Even if you cannot see them, they exist. Okay, because they have not been styled. That's why we cannot see them in the viewport, because we haven't told Mr. Architect to do, or we haven't told Mrs. CSS Decorator to do anything with them. But that doesn't mean that the furniture is not in the room. Just because it's gray and boring furniture doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Okay. All right, then we've got this thing. I kind of consider this aura, if you will. It's a little bit of magic. I think, because the margin really is, in my opinion, the most powerful piece of all of this, because it can really drastically move things around the page if need be. So I made him actually, or I made the margin actually look, why did I pick the same color? I don't want to do that. What's going on here, people? My colors are crazy. I don't want that color either. Sorry, guys. There we go. Okay. I made it this magical aura. Because for the most part, when I've seen it and I've worked with it, again, may not be definitive, it's invisible. But it is so amazingly powerful on the page. Okay, and Ingrid Inline has those as well. And as a reminder, Ingrid may or may not actually have these things be able to be used. Some of them may be shut off or not able to be set. Okay, all right. So just to give you another version of the box model, that's a cutesy version of it, but you could think of them as completely different pieces. And in fact, when you code them into CSS, they do. They act like completely separate pieces. It's kind of wild how it does it. Let's start with the content. I wish I would have done this in a different way because I should have gone left to right, but you start with the content. This is where you are holding, this could be your P tag, okay? And this is gonna be whatever text, okay? That is the content part of the box model. That is the very core, the middle. But it's important to recognize that the content actually starts the box model. And every picture I see of the box model doesn't really address that very well. And that doesn't seem confusing to people who naturally can pick up code, but people who have to really, really work at it, they're not natural readers, if you will, that's a perplexing thing. So you build the box first with the content. So technically, Mr. Architect starts it all because he pulls the tag out of the briefcase and then he decides that he's going to decide what type of box he wants to make. And then we put the content in and form a dotted box around the content. Okay, and then around there is the padding. I think of it as a protector, almost like when you have to package something and send it out to Amazon, especially if it's fragile. You're not just going to put that fragile piece right in there. It's something that's going to give that item a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of protection, because most of these things by default, and you'll see it as we progress through these videos, they're pretty squashed. The boxes are very, very tiny. They're almost default to take up as minimal amount of space as possible because a lot of these over here are set to their default small value, almost like they're space savers, probably because it has to do with energy. I don't know if that's an accurate assessment or not, but that's what we're going to go with in my head. Okay, so this is called padding. Okay, and that was over here in the purple. I just broke my box apart into separate pieces so you could see it a little bit. Because we teach the box model on a whole. Every time I've been taught it, at least. I can't say that completely. But when you code them into CSS, they're separate. So that was very befuddling to me. I see why now, but I didn't get it then. Okay, then we have a border. All right, I consider the border almost like the actual Amazon box itself. It's going to protect not only the content, but it's going to keep that padding secure and safe. You can get different size boxes. You could have big, thick boxes. You could have really thin boxes. It just kind of depends on the content and what you're actually using it for. So just know that this is called the border. Okay. And that was the one that was teal, this teal color on our box model, our Betty block. And then we have the magical aura of the margin. It's just really, I mean, of all the ones that confuse me, I mean, I laugh now, but maybe I'm just the slowest learner in the world. I'm not sure, but I didn't get that this was here almost all the time. It surrounds the box. It's kind of like an Amazon box floating in the atmosphere. And pretend you pack that Amazon box and it's in its default state at the factory and it hasn't moved. That doesn't mean that there's not air around it, that there's not things happening around it. That box is likely in a building or in the laundromat. It's going to be surrounded by the outside walls of the laundromat or other boxes or other blocks. It could be squished within a stack of boxes. The moral of the story is there's stuff happening around the content, the padding and the border that I did not get. It's almost, I mean, if you have a grid of pixels, let's go back to Mr. Viewport. Okay, you have a grid of pixels. Just because you're using up a tiny space, say I want an inline element right here. Okay, that doesn't mean that the rest of the screen does not exist. There's other things happening. You likely aren't going to be able to see them though. But we have to basically tell those lights or pixels or whatever, however screens work. I don't even know. I wish I was an electrician so I understood whether or not they need to be on or off, essentially. We need to give them some kind of behavior. So that helped me when I was like, okay, there's stuff still happening even if I'm not the one coding or actually making it happen. All right, so one more kind of conceptual thing, and then we'll go into W3 schools and see this in a different way. All right, so here's the box model again. This is Lynn Bailey's version of the box model. Probably looks a little bit different than what you guys have seen it to be. More artistic and crazy probably, but welcome to my brain. Okay, so this is the content. And that could be a P tag. And that is surrounded by a dotted line just to represent that the content or that P tag is created by a tag element, which makes a box out of Mr. Architect's briefcase. Okay. And then we have got padding. And let's just, no, I'm going to take the time to redraw that because I just did that. We'll just write padding. And then we have our border. And then we have the mystical, magical margin. Okay. All right, we are done with our friendly little worksheet for now. Let's take a look at this in W3 schools. And then we'll go back into our code that we started in the last video, maybe? Okay. So in order to find that I am not making up this information as usual, I got it all from W3 schools. I studied this before I went through and actually came up with these conceptual drawings. So if I'm misunderstanding them in any way, I apologize, but this is how my brain happened to get it. So I went to HTML tutorial and I went to HTML block and inline to get there. And then it does give a basic explanation of block level elements, and hopefully you can see that this is Betty Block. She is going to span the entire thing from left to right in the viewport. So a P is a block element, and a div is a block element. Okay, and you can even do the try it yourself so that you can see that it spans from left to right in the example as well. Okay, and then if you go down, we also have Ingrid Inline. If you notice, she doesn't take up the whole space. She just takes up the space inside the line that she needs to take up. So she's going to be sometimes a smaller element because she only takes up the width and the height of the actual text or content or whatever's actually inside of her. Okay, and you can do the try it yourself to see, again, that's an inline element. All right, now this blew my mind. I actually drew these out in markers. I wish you guys could see my notes when I saw this, but I found this in W3 schools and I was like, oh, okay, all right. Here's all of, this not all, I should not say all. It's not all of the block level elements. It's a good fixing for a beginner of what type of tag elements you might find that work like block level elements. So if you do get to this point and you're trying to actually design a basic website and you're not quite sure why things are moving all crazy and wonky, this is probably going to be a good place to start because it explains the default behavior of those particular boxes, whether or not they're going to fall down from the top to the bottom starting in the left corner, or if they're going to fall in line like Ingrid does. And here are the inline elements. I actually went through and wrote index cards for all of these and tried to sort them and understand them a little bit, and it did help a lot. I keep this note up on computer quite a bit. All right, let's go and look at it in CodePen now that you know where to find that I'm not insane. All right, what we are gonna do is take that same code that we were working on, and we're gonna look these up to see whether or not they are a block or an inline, and then we're gonna change the content of the particular tag to show that. That way, as you see the different colors, you'll be able to tell. Hopefully by now, after that little explanation, you can see quickly which one's which, but if not, that's okay, because trust me, I probably wouldn't have been able to either. So let's start with the P tag. Okay, we are gonna start up here, and we're gonna look up whether or not a P tag, okay, so this is my inline elements list, and I don't see it here. So it's probably going to be a block level element. Yep. Okay, so I found P right here, and it is a block level element. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to reflect that content to say this is a block level element. Okay, and hopefully you can see that in the viewport that did change. Okay, now we're going to look up H1. Okay, let's see if we can find that one. We're going to go back. And okay, I also see that one here. H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They are all going to be block level elements. Again, all that really means is how they behave on the page. Where are they going to position themselves in their default before Mrs. CSS Decorator comes along and bosses them around, or something in the HTML code that might possibly boss them around. So these are default states, which is kind of a big deal. Okay, this is a block level element, and we prove that by looking at W3 schools. Okay, let's look up LI. All right, LI is on this list as well. So we are going to plug that one in as a, this is a block element. I don't even know why I'm putting a level on there. In my head that makes sense apparently. Okay, all right, let's go ahead and check out span. And it looks like this one's an inline, which we knew already. I gave you a little hint because Ingrid Inline was drawn with a span tag. So hopefully you caught that. All right, so this is an inline element. And we can even put Ingrid Inline here if that helps you remember. And we got Betty Block. It helped me. It seems stupid, but it did. All right, again, I have an attribute on here, a source attribute, so don't let that confuse you. It's still just an image tag, but the image tag has an attribute called source, and it's connected to a link telling it where to find that actual image. But we can still look to see whether or not it's an inline or a block. And it looks like it is an inline element. So it belongs in the Ingrid inline family. So I am going to put here just for a minute, this is an inline element, but I'm going to take it away because if you can see, it'll throw off my demonstration a little bit. We're not going to go into all that tonight, but I just want you to be able to focus on the orchid colored square. Okay, but it's an inline element. And let's look up the button. I guess, hopefully you can guess what this one's going to be. We'll see how good of a teacher I was. All right, so it looks like button is here, and that is under the inline element area. So that one is also an inline element, but you didn't know that this is that I organized them like that. Okay. All right, so we went through and we decided which one was which. So let's just take a look and make sure that the behavior matches what I was explaining in our worksheet with our employees of the block level or the block construction company. Okay, so we have the red one is a block element, so it spans from left to right the full way. Second one is orange and is also a block element and spans from left to right the whole way. It takes up the whole space in the default. As does yellow, the list. And then we have 3 span tags. We have a blue, a pink, or I'm sorry, a purple, and the green. And they're going to fall in line together by default. There is, as you can see, some default spacing between some of the block elements, whereas we don't get as much of that default spacing with the span elements. They take up pretty much just the room that they need. As soon as the text stops, that blue element stops. Okay, and then we've got the button. Hopefully you don't ever actually style your button like that, because that would be hideous, but whatever, it is what it is. All right, now let's play with this a little bit and see what happens. And I did this quite a bit, which is why I was telling you that trick where you go through and put the background color on. It helps me see what's happening as I code. So let's go. I'm curious about this blue span, okay? He's pretty long. I want to see what happens once. I don't know why I can't get in there. I'm so tired of this. Okay, put my computer back. All right, let's type some more. This is an inline element. It is blue. I want to see the behavior when I just keep adding text content. All right. So it looks like it grows. Awesome. So it kept going to the right, from the left to the right. So the width changed, but not the height, okay? Because it didn't need to. It only takes up the space of the text. That's what the inline elements do. Let's go and change a block element and see what happens. Okay, I want to see. All right, I'm gonna go up to the orange element, the H1, because I want to see what happens. This is a block element. I want to watch the behavior this type of HTML element, because I know Betty block acts a little different than Ingrid does. Just even other than having different shoes. Okay. So it grew. It grew quite a bit, actually. So it still stretches from the left to the right, and I'm looking at the orange box, and it grew at least the length of 2 more lines because the content needed. So it looks like the block level element will adjust as need be to the content. So that's good to know. All right, let's watch what happens when I change. We learned this in a couple videos back. If I pick the width attribute and I make the image about 500 units, we haven't gotten into what in the world that 500 means yet, but so don't worry about it right now. And I change the height. Well, no, let's see what happened with just the width. Let's go slow it down, Lynn. Slow it down. Get excited. Okay. Nothing happened with the width. Huh. I'm looking at the yellow. Nope. I'm not looking at the yellow. I'm looking at the, I should be looking at the purple? Orchid color. Okay. All right, so something is happening. I don't know if you can see it because CodePen isn't letting me go all the way down, or we got some squishy behavior. My guess is it's probably squishy behavior. Okay, so, but the width did change, okay? And I'm gonna show you again. I'm gonna hold it up. So. Okay, all right, so we're back to our set start spot. We have a really long blue, and then we have an orchid square, and then we have a smaller grid. Okay, so let's try that width again. I'm gonna go a little less on the width to see if we can watch a little bit. Okay, let's try 200 and see what happens. Okay, so it did go down, and that was that inline behavior I was telling you about. If it runs out of room because that little blue element takes up so much space, it's going to then go to the next line. Okay, let's see what happens if we add height, if that changes anything. Let's try adding a height of 200. Nothing. I wonder why. Interesting. That's where I was telling you that inline elements aren't going to always respond to certain types of behavior changes. particularly with margin and padding and all that. I'm not going to go in too in depth with that because I don't want to confuse you for just a simple example, but just start trying to pay attention to whether or not, just because it's not working doesn't mean you broke the code. That might be because it's a different type of element or different type of whatever you happen to be working with. So that one might be an instance where you want to, don't just default say that you messed it up, maybe go to W3 Schools and check to see if you can find out what what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, we're almost done with this video tonight, but I want to show you a little bit of margin action. I don't know if I even want to get into that tonight or in this video actually, because it's getting kind of long. Yeah, let's stop this particular video here and we will start working with more of the box model, margin, padding, and all of those in a new video.